All right, all right. If you can hear me and I sound semi-human, give me a thumbs up. All right. How do I sound, Sarah? Well, if you guys can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Okay, good. My router, I've restarted everything, checked the latency on the YouTube and all that. So let me start over. Third time lucky, right? Is that how it says? All right, all right. I thought I had everything ready to go. Man, I had everything set up and ready to go at 12, and then, you know, Murphy's Law. Okay, good deal. What I was saying before, I was talking about the Olivet discourse, and it's interesting to me that Jesus, being this from a Roman's perspective, being this back, low-level prophet in the backwater province of the Roman Empire. The Romans were the thing, right? They were the thing going on at the world at that time. Everything revolved around the Roman Empire and the dictates of the Caesars. And here's Jesus walking out of the temple there in Jerusalem with his disciples, and they're looking back and remarking about how beautiful it is because the sun's starting to hit its the setting sun. And so Jesus walks a little bit out and he says, not one of these stones is going to be left standing on top of the other. And then he walks, right? He walks over down the Kidron Valley over to the Olivet, the Mount of Olives, and he walks up the Mount of Olives, which is a pretty steep hill. And they get to the top, presumably, and then are looking back over the old city. And the disciples come up to him and said, well, they ask him the three questions, what's going to be the sign of your coming, the end of the age, and when is all this going to happen? And so Jesus begins to lay out what we know as the Olivet Discourse. And from there, he mentions deception around four times. So if you're a Roman and you're listening into this, or you're seeing this, or maybe you find out about it a few days later, you might Jesus might sound very presumptuous about what he's predicting about the end of the age. And here they are in the first century. They don't have modern communications. They don't have the internet. They don't have any of that stuff. I mean, it's all word of mouth. And then, if a message had to get sent from the Caesar to, one of his generals, it had to be written down on a scroll, and then it had to be hand carried by a, a rider on a horse or somebody on a ship to pass that message along. And by the time it gets to wherever it's going, it may be days to weeks, even months old. And now here is Jesus saying in the last days that one of the biggest signs is going to be deception. Now, I find it fascinating that he's able, sitting on the Mount of Olives and looking over the city. I imagine that as he's talking to them, he's also looking down through time, and he's beginning to lay out things in this kind of a outline fashion for them. And some of these things would be later picked up by the other apostles, and they would be expounded upon. And in particular, Jesus is thinking back or thinking forward to the time when John would receive this in the revelation. He would receive the revelation on the island of Patmos, and then that would really kind of put of all of the Old Testament prophecies, as well as the things that he's taught and the other apostles have taught, and now they're going to be kind of put into this kind of systematic order going forward. And that book would be really kind of magnum opus of everything that's going to play out for the rest of time. But it would seem if you were a Roman and you were, a fly on the wall in this instance, and you're just listening to what's going on, and you're thinking, man, he sounds pretty presumptuous to lay out this claim about all that's going to happen. And I often use the counter argument like, well, what if Jesus had said the world's going to get better and better, and the Christianity would overtake the world and everything? By the time that Christ comes back the second time, it would be like paradise on earth. What if he gave the exact opposite of predictions? And what if the other apostles gave the exact opposites? Well, clearly, we would know two things. Either we have a ways to go, or he was just wrong, which would come into question, call into question his divinity and all of the things about the claims that he made, during his ministry. But here we are now in this day and age where everything is just played out exactly like he said. And what's fascinating to me is that we live now in this age of information. And you go through all the different industrial revolutions. The first industrial revolution dealt with mechanization. The second industrial revolution dealt with adding electricity or electrifying the systems and the grids and all that, and applying that to modern society. And then, three is the introduction to automation, where things are now beginning to put into systems that can be run on these kind of computers and things like that. And now here in the fourth industrial revolution, we're in this cyber physical age where anything that could be connected to the internet will be connected to the internet. And not only that, but looking just at the last two, the third industrial revolution and the fourth, with the explosion of information processing was going to be accessible to the entire world. And through that medium would come deception. It would be this ability to mass communicate like we're doing right now. I tried unsuccessfully the first two times, but now here on the third time, I'm able to communicate with you guys clearly around the world. And T Miller says, "I was early, now I'm late." No, you're just on time, T Miller. Um, but now that we're communicating around the world, there is lies the potential for mass deception, which we've seen. It's been ongoing for a long time, but really the blinders came off around the time of Trump in 2016, and we started to see the media for what it really was, which is the fifth column, as you will. They're really just an arm piece for the government, a mouthpiece for the government, to push whatever agenda they want to push. Now, with that said, we know all the signs. Most everybody on here is familiar with the signs. They're familiar with the judgments, and I'm not saying you're all experts. I'm not an expert, but like we've heard all this a lot. And when I was listening to Ken Ortiz this morning, he was talking about the pathology of the end times, and I found that to be pretty fascinating. And even though we look at the signs and the judgments, and some of these things can be pretty frightening, I think the pathology is even more frightening because when I start laying all this stuff out, it's going to be like, um, it'll make sense in a minute. But imagine the mindset people have where you're watching Netflix and you're watching a true crime documentary about a serial killer, blah blah blah, and you they call it Netflix and binge, right? You just sit down and binge through whatever the documentary is, and you are when you're done with it, you turn the lights off, you go to bed, you sleep like a baby. Now you put on a movie from a scary movie from whoever, it could be about whatever, it could be about monsters or ghosts or whatever. And then that's the thing that keeps you up frightened. You've got to keep a light on and you're just kind of checking all the closets and all that. And it's so interesting to me that uh, the things that are truly frightening in this world, we don't seem to like, we become very desensitized to, but the things that are uh, almost completely less likely to happen, we are frightened by those things. But I find that men can be the most terrifying monsters of all. And when we look back through the history of mankind, we've done some pretty terrible things to each other. Now, I broke this down and what he talked about into some bullet points here because it kind of I wanted to lay it out in a kind of a chronological fashion. But when we talk about the times in which we live now, just the way that Western civilization has flourished and really blossomed over the last 5 centuries, we've really come into this time, um, say from the mid 20th century till today, that is really the height of hedonism and the height of materialism. And I think because of the way that modernity has freed up so much time for people that they're not having to work all day long out in a field picking cotton or, you know, doing whatever, manual labor, farming, what have you. They have a lot more free time on their hands. And the old saying is, idle time is the devil's playground or something, plaything. And so with all this free time, we've become obsessed with finding things that are pleasurable to do. And this has blossomed into a whole uh, industries of things, whether it's sports or entertainment or video games or books or arts or whatever, any kind of pastime people can have. It really now that is what people live for. And the not the old saying, but it's a saying like, that's a first world problem when you're complaining about your Wi-Fi being out or something, where you've got people around the world who can't even get clean drinking water or food to eat. But really, we are in this first world bubble, echo chamber, whatever you want to call it, where we just become very consumed with having fun and consumed with adventure and consumed with all of these things that we think life should be. And that really speaks to the hedonism and to the materialism. I guess there's kind of two aspects to it. One is that we become very addicted to the things that make up our life and tools that we use and things. I mean, whether it's a smartphone or favorite brand of clothes, whatever. I mean, you could apply this any level of any number of ways, but there's a form of materialism now that really has become that we're at the height of it, I believe, where you look at two pieces of like two purses, right? I'm just using this as an example, but you could really use anything. One purse has a name on a label and it's $300 and the other purse doesn't have the name on the label. It's the exact same purse and you can get it for like 20 bucks. I mean, so we you apply that across to anything, right? There is so many there's so many things that we've become accustomed to, that has really r- spoiled us as a generation. And and then that's another form of material. So you have those two things, right? Materialism. And then you have the hedonism, which I mentioned earlier, which is really seeking pleasure. And I know most people think hedonism is in terms of like debauchery or, just partying, you know, drinking, sex, all that kind of stuff. And I guess if you put it on a spectrum, that would be on one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is just having fun and chasing things that are pleasurable. And I know around here, having a boat, living for the weekend so you could take your boat out on the lake or go ride in your four-wheelers or, there's nothing wrong with those things, but I think we've just become a culture that is so much more important than almost anything else. And so the priorities there within hedonism and materialism we're really at the tippy top, and when you read Ezekiel's account of Sodom and Gomorrah, that was one of the charges that is laid against them is that their addiction to hedonism and pleasure and material things has become, um, part of that judgment. It wasn't just a sexual perversion, but they also kinda go hand in hand, if you will. Now, Speaking of those things, the Bible does tell us what is going to be the human condition at the end of time. And so I wrote these down, and I'm just going to pull from a few passages here. First being from we have there in Matthew 24, which Jesus is talking about, because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. And it's talking about a deadening inside of us. And I'll talk about, and I'll refer back to this in a second. But let me go to 2 Timothy 3 here. But know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. So these are the things that this is what Paul says the condition of man is going to be in the last days. Think about what we'll come back and revisit some of these too, because I want to touch on that after I read this rest of it. Here in 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 18 through 20, for when they speak great swelling, he's talking about false prophets here, false teachers, for when they speak great swelling words of emptiness, they allure through the lust of the flesh, through lewdness, the ones who have actually escaped from those who live in error. While they promise them liberty, they themselves are slaves of corruption. For by whom a person is overcome, by him also he is brought into bondage. For if after they escape the pollutions of the world through the knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they are again entangled in them and overcome, the latter end is worse for them than the beginning. Here, 2 Peter chapter 3, knowing this first, that scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lust, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. And this is speaking to a willful ignorance that they know what's right, they just don't care. Here in James chapter 5, verses 1 through 3, come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have heaped up treasure in the last days. And then the last passage here for this section is in by Jesus to the church in Laodicea. And to the angel of the church of the Laodiceans write, these things says the Amen, the faithful and the true witness, the beginning of the creation of God. I know your works, that you are neither hot nor cold, or cold nor hot. I could wish you were cold or hot. So then, because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. Because you say, I am rich and have become wealthy and have need of nothing, and do you not know that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked? So here is just a sampling of some passages speaking about the condition of people in the last days. And again, it takes me back up to this idea of people addicted to materialism and hedonism. And these two things run riot through these passages because they apply to so many different kinds of things that are happening today. Now, in a way to summarize this, 2 Timothy 3, it indicates, or it's an indication of humanity adopting this predatory personalities. So let's talk about some of these predatory personalities. You have narcissism. So narcissism is this idea of having a sense of self, or an exaggerated sense of self-worth, and then you have a lack of empathy for other people. So when you begin to think more about yourself than anybody else, you're becoming a narcissist. Now, a narcissism isn't something that is learned. It's not something that it's like taught in the school or learned through some type of political thing, although it's now being capitalized on that. we're born sinners. We're born narcissists. When you're a baby, you're probably at the most narcissistic stage of your life because it's all about you. When you're hungry, you cry. When you need your diaper change, you cry. When somebody's not giving you attention, you cry, you throw a fit, tantrum, whatever. And that goes all the way up through your childhood ages. And I would even say some of these other two will also apply to being a child coming up, right? Um, you go from narcissism to sociopath. So a sociopath, which is kind of that next level narcissist, they are very self-centered, exploitative, and incredibly predatory. Now, the next stage from sociopath is psychopath. And from a psychopath is this idea where something is, it's not simply a manner of behavior. There's something wrong with you. Like there's something um, neurologically, there's things that are not connecting in your brain anymore. And one of the one of the hallmarks of being a psychopath is having zero empathy. You don't care. You don't care about anything but yourself. And a good example of like a psychopath from something that everybody would know would be like Hitler or Stalin, where they are narcissistic, which led to their sociopathic tendencies, which ultimately led to their psychopathic tendencies. I mean, think about how many people they've had killed in the course of their life. Between the two of them, I mean, you're looking at probably 60 million people lost their lives. Now, we don't know if Hitler ever killed anybody personally. He probably didn't, or Stalin. But what we do know is that through them and by them, they had tens of millions of people killed, and with very or not very little, but I'd say zero remorse for what they've done. Now, as a child, you are born very narcissistic, and it takes the tempering of parents to good parents to kind of weed that behavior out of you. Now, a child that grows up in a broken home or grows up in a an abusive home or some other type of home where negative things are happening will then begin to develop sociopathic tendencies and even psychopathic tendencies. So at that psychopathic stage, that's where things have gone wrong for so long that your mind, the nerves and the neurons that connect, this part of your brain to that part of your brain and make those connections that deal with, say, empathy, those things don't exist anymore. So when you look at serial killers or you look at these kind of people that have been caught, arrested, and studied that are in jail or have probably been killed since then, they almost always come from really broken homes or really, really just terrible situations. And so something inside of them breaks uh, somewhere along the way, and there's really very little chance of recovery at that point. And there could be some type of recovery, but um, I don't know. I don't know what the percentages is of people that are able to be recovered from that versus the ones that go on to do terrible things. Like the shooters in the Columbine school, or you know, yeah, I don't know. You could list any number of things. We've got so many things going on right now, um, especially in the day and age where we live, because instead of trying to treat these things, what is our society has devolved to is now embracing these things and now capitalizing on these things. So, for instance, when we talk back to um, narcissism, where you have this exaggerated sense of self worth, where cultural Marxism and all of the progressive ideologies of the left, where they have really gone and taken this to, is back to this thing that Karl Marx developed, which was this idea of dividing and conquering. And so you divide people into groups. Well, how you divide them into groups is you begin to, um, and this is done in a very exploitative way, is to begin to group them by victimhood classes. And this is where we get this idea of intersectionalism, where if you are white male Protestant, you're in terms of like where you are at the rankings, you're at the very bottom. And at the very top, you might have, say, a transsexual Native American uh, pygmy or something. I don't know. I mean, you think about all the things stacked against you, and put those people at the very top. Now they have the hierarchy now of the victimhood class, and then you can go from there all the way down. You keep going down through all the different things where you're disadvantaged at somewhere in your life, and they disregard anybody. Even if it used to be like a black American was kind of at the top of that class, but now what's happened is they've been supplanted by a lot of the gender ideology, the gender um, classes they've developed now. Now there's I don't even know how many genders there are. There's probably like 60,000 different kinds of genders that you can be, but those have now replaced the Black Americans. Well, why did that happen? Well, if you think back to before the Great Society in the 1960s, LBJ's Great Society, Black Americans enjoyed high um, or low divorce rates. They had very strong family structures. Their kids were growing up and succeeding. And LBJ, in the Democrat Party, needed a steady um, voter base to be able to turn to and be able to blow the whistle every 4 years to get them to go out and vote. So they start drumming up all of these issues, and there were issues. Don't get me wrong; I'm not downplaying any of that. But they capitalized on that, and then they made them a victim class, in perpetuity, from the 1960s until just recently. And I think what's happened within the Black community is there's been an awakening um, to realize like this is just all politics. They don't really care about me. They just come out every 4 years and promise all this stuff, and they can look at their communities, they can look at the inner cities, and they can see that this hasn't been working. And so they, in large measure, I guess, from the time of really from Trump forward, they've been really kind of going back to their roots, which is the Republican Party. The Republican Party was the anti-slavery party that Abraham Lincoln ran and won in 1860. And so somehow during the 1960s, the messaging got flipped, and now the Republicans were all these old white guys, and then the Democrats were these people championing the little guy. But really, that's not really what's been happening. Is they've been using intersectionalism to profit off these people so they can stay in power. And what has the Democrat Party largely been? It's been old white guys, right? Old white ladies, old white guys, for forever and ever. Um, and it's not really just it's only been until the last, 10, 15 years where we started seeing a lot of different ethnicities and things in politics. But it was all about control. And now we live in this time where those tendencies, whether it's narcissism or sociopath or psychopath tendencies, now are being celebrated and made to be normal. So these things are now becoming normalized, and that's why it's increasingly frightening to live in this world, because people are becoming unhinged in every way, shape, and form. And you go to these protests, I just read the news this morning that Jews in Columbia University are being told, "Don't even come to school today. Like, it's not safe for you." And, Jews, for the large part, since the 1940s, have voted Democrat. And I think this has been a huge wake-up call for them, at least from October 7th, that the left hates them with a passion. And it's not when we talk about anti-Semitism, it's not even rational. We don't see people protesting uh, people from Nepal or from Myanmar or from Niger or from Argentina or any other place where atrocities have taken place. Nobody cares. Why? So why is it about the Jews? What is it about the Jews that causes them to go into this frenzy of just unhinged uh, aggression? Well, it's satanic, and Satan is behind the scenes fanning these flames. Um, and so what I think the big disconnect was prior to October 7th was, in America at least, you had Jews that were very successful and very liberal and thriving in academia, thriving in Hollywood, thriving in the business world, thriving in the arts and so forth. And they were able to shield themselves from this anti-Semitism because everybody said, "Oh, no, I'm not anti-Semite, I'm anti-Zionist." They're against the nation of Israel existing, which a lot of liberal Jews could get behind that because they didn't care one way or the other. They're doing well where they are. But what October 7th peeled the Band-Aid off of this thing was that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism were almost one and the same, and you couldn't take one out without the other. And that's really what's been flourishing since then is that the removal of that has really caused a wake-up call for Jews in America, and I'd say Jews around the world, Australia and Europe as well, to realize that there's no real safe place for us here. And it reminds me of Theodore Herzl, who back in the 1890s had attended or was watching a trial against a Frenchman, a French Jewish guy there named, I think his name was Alexander Dreyfus or Andrew Dreyfus, and he could figure out pretty early on that they didn't care about the facts of the case. They were gonna kill him, execute him and all that because he was a Jew, and that was a wake-up call for Herzl, and that's when he began to come up with the idea that we need to get back to our country, and that led to the First Zionist Congress in 1897, which they drafted a constitution that said that they would do whatever they could to get Jews back into their homeland. So he recognized that then, and I think we're at that time again where Jews around the world are beginning to wake up to the reality that it's not safe where they are simply because they're Jewish, for no other reason whatsoever. And so now we're at this time where things have moved beyond simply psychological profiling. Now things are the rubber's meeting the road where people are becoming unhinged and seemingly demon possessed everywhere. And it's just like this. It reminds me of this movie called The Crazies. I don't know if you're into that kind of movie, but I found it fascinating because you have a small town that uh, gets inadvertently exposed to some military toxic waste that accidentally lands in their drinking water, and people begin to the plane crashes in the lake or whatever, and it's got all this toxic chemicals, and what it does is it makes people when they drink the water or even they drink milk from a cow that's drinking from that water, they're getting exposed to this toxin that begins to make them do things they normally wouldn't do, and that they have no inhibitions anymore, and it makes them go crazy, and it's just whatever your impulse is to do. If you don't like somebody, you would just instead of just, like, keeping that, to yourself and going about your business, you would just pull a gun out and go out and shoot them. Like, that's so this whole town becomes infected like that. I think that's what's happening writ large across the world, except it's not some military toxin. This is Satan and the spirit of Antichrist just flooding the world with this stuff. And if you're not plugged into Jesus Christ and you're not born again and saved and have being sealed by the Holy Spirit, you're subject to this. You are subject to being caught up in all of this stuff, even if you don't mean to. And I look at the one of the things about, let me rabbit trail here for a second. One of the things about the Roman Empire that made them so terrifying was that they came in and generally if they were going to take a town or whatever, they didn't come in and just destroy it and raid it and whatever. They put a siege around it, and they basically would give the people of that town or that place time to give up and surrender. And then they would go in and they would put their people in charge and they would be, start and if they surrendered in time, they would go in and do this and basically now they belong to the Romans. Now if they didn't surrender, the Romans would just wait them out until they started to starve to death and, turn to cannibalism and all sorts of other horrible things, and then they would go in and basically conquer it militarily, and that's what we saw happen in Jerusalem in 70 AD, and what was terrifying about that is that you would probably like the Roman if you met a Roman centurion or soldier or general, whatever, nowadays, there'd probably be a lot of correlation between where we are today and what they believed then. Um, and General Titus didn't want to destroy the temple. That wasn't his intent. But I guess some of the legions that he had underneath him really hated the Jews, and they took advantage of this opportunity to destroy the temple. So it's like, um, I'm trying to think. The I'm trying to think of this phrase or this. I guess in a sense that the Romans were true believers in the sense they thought they were doing good, but by them much evil was wrought, and so that's kind of where we are today in the pathology of the end times, where we're living in a day and age where people are increasingly becoming unhinged, and I think this is largely in part due to the fanning of the flames of the demonic realm and the supernatural realm. Really, if you're not, again, if you're not plugged into Jesus, you're going to be caught up and swept up in this deception that's going to be um that's around the world right now, going around the world over and over and over, and it seems like it's speeding up. And so think about one of the things that's pretty frightening to think about, though, is that if you think about the hatred that people have towards the Jews now around the world, um, imagine what the world will be like 1 minute after the rapture when there is no restrainer restraining it anymore. And now that fury is going to be turned against the Christians. And I don't mean the church, but I mean people that come to faith after the rapture, the tribulation saints. They're going to face a terrifying, terrifying prospect of persecution. And I think uh, we could simply turn on the news today and see some of these places where what happened on October 7th. I mean, that would be all over the world immediately after the rapture, where you're going to have armed groups of criminals and thugs and whoever else coming in and dragging people out of their house because they had a cross on their door or something, and even though they weren't really saved, they were playing church or whatever. Now they're going to be put to the fire because the Antichrist cannot have. He's not going to have any competition. He doesn't want any competition going into this event because we know by the midpoint he wants everybody to worship him. So let me just read this last passage um, here in Daniel chapter 8, speaking about the Antichrist. And we read this, let's think back to some of those definitions of like narcissism and sociopathic tendencies and psychopathic tendencies. It says here in Daniel chapter 8, verse 23, in the latter part of the reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, and this is from the NIV version, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people, and he will cause deceit to prosper. He will consider himself superior, and when they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the prince of princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. I mean, the Antichrist is going to be the textbook definition of all three of those. He's narcissism, sociopathic tendencies, and psychopath. He is going to be a psychopath. He's going to have zero empathy for anybody but himself, and he's going to put Hitler and Stalin to shame in terms of how much damage and destruction he can wreak around the world. So if nothing else, I think if people watch this or stumble across this at some point that don't know Jesus, just know that aside from the judgments, aside from the supernatural things that are going to happen, the human monsters on the planet at that time will be probably the most terrifying things that they will encounter ever, and people will become unhinged, to a degree that we haven't never seen it yet. Even the worst of humanity that we've seen now, like October 7th when Hamas invaded Israel, that that really won't hold a candle to what's coming. And so I would pray for any of those people that don't know Jesus and the rapture hasn't happened to make that decision now for him, because you don't want to be here for what follows. I mean, that's in and of itself is bad enough, but then you throw on top of that the judgments, the demonic realm coming, hell being unleashed upon the earth. I mean, it is going to be a frightening time. But okay, let me switch gears here a little bit, because I wanted to touch a little bit on time in Israel. So let me get a drink. When we think about God, yeah, I know most people here today are asking when is the rapture going to happen? Like, how much longer are we going to have to go through all this stuff? And I think I think we probably I don't want to presume anything, but most people don't have a really good understanding of God and how he functions. And I don't claim to know all that, but I do want to share this stuff with you. That God is, we know this. God is not bound by time like we are. He is timeless. He is forever. He is the beginning and the end. There's nothing beyond him or further than him or aside from him. And God can create time, which he did. He can speed time up, which he has. He can slow time down, which he can. He can reverse time, which he's done, and he can compress time. And so some examples that we have, we see in Joshua 10:13, where Joshua, basically the sun and moon, everything stands still for a whole day until this battle is over with. Now, when you think about what that all entails, like the sun stopped revolving, the moon, everything is just frozen, right? And it's in that battle still going, and God's able just to pause it just like that till the battle is won. Now, on the other hand, God is able to move time backwards. We see this in 2 Kings 2011. Give me a second here. Dogs unleashed. Oh, anyways. So we see that God moved the sundial back 10 degrees in 2 Kings 2011, and it's again mentioned in Isaiah 38:8. So God has complete mastery of time. And I know that right now, tens of thousands, perhaps millions of Christians around the world are crying out to God, saying, "How much longer?" Um, and I don't mean to make light of this, because I want to go home just as much as the next person does, but um, I think I think God's timing is gonna be absolutely perfect, and he is a loving God, wishing that none would perish, right? We see that in 2 Peter 3 as well. When we understand the eternal consequences of dying in your sins, it's not simply being in hell forever. It's being stuck in this timeless state of being corrupted or sinful, whatever, and then you're stuck in that timeless state forever, and in extreme agony, torture, pain, unlike anything that we can even really fathom. And I think really that there's so many people right now that are on the cusp of becoming saved or becoming believers, and it's just that we're at this kind of um, fulcrum now where I think we're coming into this window of time that now, as that thing, as that begins to bleed off, the people that are coming to faith begins to dwindle down or whatever. And if God doesn't intervene at that point, then it will go to say zero, right? Now, that's when God does something like the rapture, which then is that wake up call. And that on the other side of the rapture, we see this huge soul harvest like the world's never seen come because of that. And so I guess let me rephrase that in a different way. Um, if you take America, for example, and you look at the state of Christendom in America, the state of the church or whatever, by the late 1990s, things had become pretty stagnant, you know. And it takes something like 9/11 to wake people up out of their slumber. And so right after 9/11, you had a ton of people. I don't know the exact numbers. I don't even know if anybody's ever calculated the numbers of people that came to faith after 9/11. But it woke them up. It shook them out of this lethargy where they had been kind of just numbed by all of the hedonism and the materialism and all this the stuff that we chase after all this stuff, right? To make our life easier and more pleasurable. But then something like 9/11 happens and it wakes us up out of that. And that lasted for a little bit of time. And then the next kind of thing that happened that woke people up was 20 years later. It was uh it was the pandemic in 2020. And a lot of people, even Christians that had been just sleepwalking in their faith, now woke up and said, "Oh, I think something's going on here prophetic." They begin to wake up. So I think that we'll come to some point of stagnation in the world. And then I think the rapture then is that next big event that triggers that. And at the end of that, there's no denying what had just happened, at least right afterwards. And we see in Revelation 7, uh, John is already caught up to heaven. He's being shown things by the angels and stuff. And so when he looks at let me read this from the passages. So, because it's to me it's pretty fascinating uh some things that are contrasted here. So he's told who the 144,000 are, right? In chapter 7. And then a few verses later, verse 9, he says, "And after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, tongues, standing before the throne, before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, crying out with a loud voice, saying, 'Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb.'" And so then there's a good deal of worship going on here. And then John asked the question, who are one of the elders, or he asked the question, who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? And John says, "Sir, you know." And so he said to me, "These are the ones who came out of the great tribulation, washed their robes, and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." Now, he is not told the number. He can't count the number. The people in heaven there are not told a number. It's just it says that there was a great multitude which no one could number. Now, a few verses later in chapter, I want to say it's in chapter 9, and it says, verse 15. So the 4 angels who had been prepared for the hour and the day and the month and the year were released to kill a third of mankind. Now the number of the army of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them. So 200 million was a number that could be given to John, but to those martyrs around the throne, it was a multitude that nobody could count. And these are those that come out after the rapture during the time of the tribulation. And it just seems to me that Christendom is going to go where it is today. Things are going to progress until it's becomes stagnate again. And then the rapture happens, and then that thing is the what triggers people. But they're not going to have time this time to fall back into this lackadaisical kind of, lukewarm Christianity, because the world's going to begin to persecute them severely everywhere, and it's going to cost them their life. But one thing Satan knows and is loath to do is he's loath to persecute the church, especially in the West, because or in really anywhere, because he knows that it spreads like wildfire when you begin to persecute the church. So I think this persecution begins with those people who woke up after the rapture and realized what just happened and realize where they are now. And now they are going to start getting persecuted, probably initially by just mobs of angry, unhinged, God hating people. But in that process, they end up fanning the flames of martyrdom to the point that tens of millions, more than 200 million, whatever that number is, come to faith around the world. And these are those that come out of this time of tribulation. So I know that we are itching and ready to go, but I think the severity of hell and the severity of eternal judgment is such that God is long suffering, that he doesn't want anybody to perish, but he will let that go to a point. And I think that point is where Christendom basically goes back into this slumber, if you will, like it has here in the West pretty severely. And then the rapture is that next wake up call. And then beyond that, there's no time for those people to fall back into this lukewarm lethargy. They're going to be on the run, basically being hunted for being believers in Christ. And that is where we see that huge number that comes out. Now, um, to the last point here about Israel, and I mentioned earlier about how October 7th really peeled back the veneer that separated anti-Semitism from anti-Zionism. I mean, they're one and the same, in my opinion. It's just people were trying to make that distinction prior to October 7th, and now that that's gone. Um, how close are we then? We don't have any signs for the rapture. We don't have anything telling us exactly when the rapture is going to happen. But what we do see is things that happen after the rapture now already being staged and set up. And that stage is being set, to the point now where really we're just waiting on curtains. And so whether it's the one world religion, we've seen the stage set for the one world religion. We're seeing the stage set for the one world government. We're seeing the stage set for the one world leader. These problems that we're having around the world are becoming so insurmountable that they're impossible for any one leader or any one nation to try and figure out and solve. For example, the United States has been trying to do this for the last 50, 60, 70 years, and it's becoming to the point now where they can't handle it anymore. But I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing the stage setting for the Gog and Magog conflict that is laid out in Ezekiel 38 and 39. So just reading Ezekiel in chronological order, at least from chapter 36 onward, we see things starting to flow in a very kind of things are happening in order. So we see the rebirth of the nation of Israel. They're brought back to life, but they're not a spiritual power yet. They're still very much secular, um, atheistic, or agnostic, whatever you want to call it. Um, and that has a lot of reasons due to that. I mean, all the Jews that came out of Russia, I mean, they lived under atheism for 70 years, and they did Aliyah out of Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed, and they're coming back into the land of Israel because ethnically they're Jewish and that's where they belong, but they haven't been raised in the Jewish religion and the Jewish faith because they weren't allowed to practice it in Soviet Union. And, from elsewhere, there's many people coming from different places for different reasons, but there isn't that strong religious sense of identity there with them. And then you have all the arguments and the division between those that practice Judaism, between the ultra orthodox, the liberal, etc. So there's just a ton of division within Judaism itself that's causing a delay for things like the temple and so forth. But one of the things I think is going to happen is when we see Ezekiel 38 start, is I think Russia, and this is just my opinion, this is pure speculation, but I think Russia has to be um, victorious in Ukraine. And I think we're getting to that point now where the gloves are coming off on a lot of different fronts. Now, some people that are saying, well, Russia is really weak because they couldn't even beat Ukraine. Well, that's not true because it's not just Ukraine, it's Ukraine plus NATO backing them. So their NATO is funding them. If NATO hasn't been involved, if the West hadn't been involved, Ukraine would have been done 2 years ago. But because the West had really rallied behind Ukraine, it's extended this out somewhat. But I think we're going to get to a point where the gloves are going to come off and Russia's going to steamroll Ukraine. And the only way to really stave that off is if the Western forces, whether it's NATO or the United States or both, put boots on the ground and really start fighting, force on force, which they don't want to do because that could trigger a nuclear conflict. In whether that nuclear attack is limited or it's targeted in a specific location, it's enough right now to keep them from really jumping in. But I think Russia then, after their victory in Ukraine, and I don't want this to happen, I'm just saying this is how I see this playing out, but I think after that, Russia is gonna be able to rally all the former Soviet satellite nations behind them, as well as the Muslim groups all within there, and they will then, in turn, turn their focus on the nation of Israel, but they're not gonna do that yet until the United States is taken out of the way. And so just as the US is loath to go directly and fight directly with the Russians because of the near peer threats that they have with weaponry and technology, so too is Russia not willing to advance to Israel because of the United States being there. We're still in this kind of Cold War détente or, standoff part where both sides don't really wanna go fully in just yet because they know what that means. And so for whatever reason, not whatever reason, but the restrainer is restraining things right now to this point. But I think at a certain point, whether it's right before or right after the rapture, I think the church is removed. Or I mean, right before or right after the rapture, I think Russia's invasion into Ukraine they'll just go ahead and just take it all. He's already committed 300,000 soldiers that have died. Russian soldiers have died in this conflict thus far. He's too deep into it right now to quit. Now, with that said, the minute that the West stops supporting Ukraine, they're done. They're on life support as it is right now. But I think that the second that the U.S. can't support it or NATO won't support Ukraine, they're done. Now, with that said, um, I know a lot of people have been asking questions about Speaker Johnson and that he's flipped and that that he's got Democrats bribing him or whatever. And you know what? Honestly, I I don't know the man personally, so I can't speak to what his true intentions are. I know Jack Hibbs supports him wholesale, and that Jack Hibbs is, this is coming by way of Jack Hibbs, his that Mike Johnson is a Bible believing Christian, that he knows prophecy, he understands the significance of this. And I think that all the other things aside, that he really just wanted the Israel support to go to Israel. He didn't care about the Ukraine, but the only way to get Israel the support they needed at this time was to have these other things thrown in as well. And I would just add this to the conversation this point. In 1973, Israel under Golda Meir, really, they were in a bad place in the Yom Kippur War, and they really needed support from the U.S. They needed arms, armaments, vehicles, whatever they could get to help fight this war. And at the last minute, the U.S. came through, and I'm sure there were other things attached to the aid package to them, or there was other concessions made, and so on and so forth. But Nixon, because of his own upbringing and because of his own background, and his mother understanding scripture and prophecy, he knew that this was a significant event. Now, you and I bet you there's probably not anybody here that can name any of those extra things that were added on to that, um, presumably like omnibus bill that was passed back in 73. Nor do we care. I mean, that's ancient history as far as we're concerned. Now, by Johnson giving this financial aid and support to Israel, let's think through some of the things the U.S. has just done. The U.S., after October 7th, stood by Israel politically. Now, I wrote about this and I said, hey, this is a short-lived thing, and there's strings attached and so on and so forth. I mean, it's not because we're doing it because we're altruistic and all that, and totally in love with Israel. Most of the politicians in DC hate Israel, but nevertheless, we stood with them as a nation. Secondly, when Iran launched this massive just barrage of missiles, which, had Israel not stopped them, I mean, Israel would not exist. There would be just a smoking hole there. But because the US and the UK and Saudi Arabia and Jordan, were able to intercept and they destroyed 99.9% of those missiles. I think only a couple landed out of all of the ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and the suicide drones that were launched against Israel. 99.9% were destroyed. Now, that was the second part where we came in and supported Israel. The third part is where the United States voted no in the UN Security Council, in giving the Palestinian state recognition, which we were the only ones, to my knowledge, to vote no at the Security Council. Even our allies voted yes. And then the last part is this aid package here now. So there's four pieces of support that we've given Israel in these last days. And I know that a lot of people, myself included, I thought that for sure Israel would nuke their nuclear sites and turn it into Chernobyl. But what they did was, uh, they sent a limited number of missiles in to the most and took out their radar array that were protecting their most sensitive sites in Iran. And I think that sent the message to Iran saying, we can hit you whenever we want, however we want. Like, you can't, you don't want to do this with us. It's not going to end well for you. Now, I didn't see that coming. I'm sure a lot of other folks didn't see it coming. I thought, man, this is it. But it made me re-gauge everything and how I look at it. But like, now we're at this point where Israel has the support coming back to replenish all of the Arrow 3 and David Sling and Patriot and all the stuff that Iron Dome, all of the stuff they expended here recently to rearm them and restock their armaments for that. And there was also money set aside to restart a lot of different industries in the United States that we haven't used in decades, because we've been fighting, basically against insurgencies. We haven't needed certain types of technology that we would need against a peer a near peer threat, like a force on force, conventional kind of conflict, like we would have with Russia or China. And a lot of those weapon systems and those industries have atrophied because we haven't needed that kind of technology. Um, those things are now getting a lot getting put back and given a boost to start ramping up production in those areas. And that tells me that they foresee conflict with China and Russia on the horizon in the very not too distant future. So I'm not saying that Johnson is the best thing since sliced bread. I'm saying that I think that he, being led by Scripture and perhaps the Holy Spirit, felt very compelled to help Israel in this time, even though there was all these other strings attached to it. And I would just go back and remind folks that Genesis 12, 1 through 3. Let me read that. This is still in effect. And so I know that right now Johnson's name is probably mud when it comes to the conservative side of the house. And if I weren't a Bible prophecy student and I wasn't a versed in any of this, I would probably agree with him because I wouldn't see the significance of Israel. Let me go back and read this. Genesis 12. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great. And you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." That is still in effect. That has not changed. I don't see a revision on this. I don't see God changing his mind somewhere later in the scriptures, changing that. And the fact that we have been a blessing to Israel here now 4 times, and it's not the prettiest thing in the world. Granted, we got Joe Biden leading the pack up there with a bunch of progressive leftists that probably deep down don't care for Israel. But nevertheless, through this nation, we've been able to come to Israel's aid 4 times now. And I don't know if that buys us any extra leeway. It maybe avert some tragedies and some devastations that would have come to us had we voted the other way. But I feel like we're probably right where God said we were going to be. And I think that really the next thing that happens is the rapture. And at the rapture, that is the hook in the jaw of Gog that draws him down to Israel because now he knows that Israel is no longer protected by Big Brother. And this is now the opportunity where Putin can rally all of the Muslim populations throughout all of the former Soviet states and really begin to build his plan for this, massive Eurasian empire that he wants to do. Now, all that said, um, we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. These are just kind of my thoughts on it at the moment, but we've we may have bought ourselves a little bit of good graces, nationally speaking, for this recent support. How long that lasts, I don't know, but I'm sure it will last until some politician that we have turns against Israel. So that all that to say is, yeah, we'll have to wait and see, I suppose. Okay, right. Let me go to some questions here. And again, I apologize for the technical stuff, man. I thought everything was ready to go, had it set up. I checked it, and you just don't know until you go live. All right, Sarah got this for us. So, mods, I want to say thank you to the mods before I forget at the end because I always forget. But thank you guys, and Sarah for collecting all the questions up. Tammy asked, speaking of the stones crying out, I heard someone teach that Jesus was referring to the headstones that were located near the entrance that he had entered into the city. Do you know about this? I don't. Um, I don't know that they had the same kind of headstones that we had uh, today. I know that rich people were buried in tombs, and they would put a big stone in front of the entrance to the tomb, and other people were buried in the ground, or they were, the Gentiles, I think, were, what do you call it when you burn them alive, or burn the bodies. Um, Anyways, but I don't know that is. I don't know if that's really what that meant, but the way I understood it is that nature itself would cry out had he not, um, had the people not cried out and said what they said. So, okay, good question. Sorry, I couldn't answer it better. I tend to think that's more that nature itself would cry out and praise for him. Uh, from Connie Glenn, question: in your opinion, do you think this war in Ukraine and the battles going in the Middle East were planned by the powers that be to test the equipment of modern warfare, drones, missiles, etc.? Um, well, I kind of the same mind that President Eisenhower was in creating this monster called the military industrial complex. I think that once we created that thing, it's become its own entity. And of course, they need wars to keep enriching themselves and making themselves wealthy off of this stuff. But I don't know necessarily that we could control what happened between Russia and Ukraine. Now, the US was involved in Ukraine in the Obama time period of the Obama era, um, in with the color revolutions and with, what's her name? Victoria Nuland was instrumental in helping get these pro-Russian leaders out of Ukraine and flipping it so that there would be pro-Western Ukrainian leaders. And so we've been involved in messing with the internal politics in Ukraine for a number of years, which I think led to that. But ultimately, I think it's the continued mission of NATO. NATO's existence in and of itself was what really was the trigger for all of this, because NATO kept expanding after the Soviet Union collapsed, and NATO existed to prevent the expansion of the Soviet influence, Soviet communism from spreading around the world. And so once the Soviet Union collapsed, theoretically, NATO should have transitioned into some type of European defense force, but it didn't. It just kept growing and growing and growing. And then next thing you know, we're bringing in states that are now bordering Russia, like the Baltic states. And I think the idea of us toying around in Ukraine, right in Russia's backyard, really what had been part of Russia for a long time, um, was the straw that broke the camel's back with that. So I don't think he could tolerate that any longer. Okay, just another prodigal son. Who are the holy people from Daniel 8:24? He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. So I think he's talking about the Jewish people here. He's not talking about the church, because the church is not in the church wasn't even in existence in Daniel's day, nor even projecting forward did he understand who the church would be. But I think this goes back to the covenant with death that we see. I think it's in Isaiah 28 that the Jewish people make with the Antichrist. And in that process, he whatever the deal is, I think he probably allows them to rebuild their temple. Um, after Gog and Magog is done, I think militant Islam is done. I think there will be strains of Islam around the world, but it will no longer be militant like it's been for the last 100 years. I think that will all be bled out of it with the destruction in Gog and Magog. So between these conflicts now and then Gog Magog, I think Islam is done. Think what remains after it will be this apostate version of Islam, along with the apostate version of Christianity, along with other apostate other versions of the other belief systems that will just come together. Um, but I think this is speaking to the Jewish people. Okay. Old softy. Question, have you ever seen any videos of the Ukraine war? I haven't. I wonder why. I've seen a number of them. I don't know in particular which ones you're talking about, but, um, a lot of people are misjudging the Russian will to fight here, and I'm not pro-Russia, I'm not cheerleading for them, I'm just saying that I think going into this that Putin had a very soft place in his heart for Ukraine because it's the birthplace of the Orthodox Church, and he wasn't really trying to go in to destroy it. He was going in to take back the Donetsk region where there's all these ethnic Russians were, and that was the reasoning that he gave. I don't know how true that is, but um, I think his intentions early on were very limited. I don't think he was trying to take over all of Ukraine. But as this thing is dragged on and on and on, because the West has been giving money and weapons and stuff to the Ukrainians, plus the West is doing things like blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline and all that. It's just kept this thing going. And so I think at a certain point, Russia's just going to steamroll Ukraine, and there's not really going to be anything the West can do about it. And in that steamrolling, I think that's what galvanizes the coalition behind Putin, because now he has not just defeated Ukraine, but he's defeated NATO. And then you throw in the rapture of the church somewhere in that mix right there, and now the West is completely destabilized because the United States is destabilized and falling apart, and it opens up this perfect opportunity for these leaders to go and do the things that they've been wanting to do now for decades. So Putin will turn south from Ukraine, and he may close the Salky Gap there in Poland and then retake the Baltic states that used to belong to the Soviet Union. But then he'll move back south and then reclaim Georgia and all those places along the uh, I'm blanking on the region here. Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, those places. And then at the same point, I think he'll move south in the sense that he'll join with Erdogan in Turkey and Raisi in Iran and form this kind of northern coalition to come against Israel to be done with Israel once and for all. And they just may build forces. They may, between now and then, we may just see them building forces and building infrastructure in places like Syria and perhaps even Lebanon to a certain degree. But Israel is going to have to do something about Hezbollah. And it seems like we know that the Isaiah 17 destruction of Damascus happens at some point. So we got to throw these things in there as well. So at some point, it draws all of these forces down into what presumably is now Syria and Lebanon, waiting on the doorstep of Israel. And now, one of the things I think that's come out of this recent kerfuffle with Iran has been showing the precision and strength of the Israeli, um, what's it called? The A2D2, the anti-aerial denial. I'm blanking on the other word here, but their ability to repel attacks from missiles and so forth, as well as their precision strikes with their F-35s and other type of glide bombs and stuff. They've been able to demonstrate that they're pretty powerful right now. Um, but something may factor in once that happens, where either a solar storm, perhaps it happens because of the rapture itself, but there's some type of um, I don't know if it grounds everything or if things in the atmosphere, the satellites and all that go down for a short bit of time, but they're able to move into this kind of cover of darkness, move in undetected and put up massive forces in Syria and places like that, perhaps even like western Iraq. Um, and then same thing, you have the forces that come out of the south. And we know that Russia now is pretty invested in the South and Africa with the Wagner Group and stuff, and they're going to be able to rally forces there to come and march against Israel as well. So them living in peace and security may be very a short-lived moment because they may wipe out, let's just say they finish off Hamas and Rafah, and then they do uh, massive strikes against Hezbollah in the north, and there might be some kind of intermediate peace treaty where Hezbollah agrees to move their forces north of the Litani River in Lebanon, which now can give Israel some breathing room. Um, but then the rapture happens, and then now there's this big opportunity for all of these forces to march against Israel. And now they know the United States is not going to come to the aid of Israel because we're going to be in the midst of our own kind of self-destructing process. So it's hard to say, but it's fascinating to watch all this play out. Janice Clark, would you explain lukewarm? Well, lukewarm, in my opinion, is like somebody that's a fence sitter. They don't really get uh, they don't get drawn into anything. They just kind of want to keep to themselves. They don't want to mess with anything. They don't stand for anything. They don't oppose anything. They're just kind of going with whatever the culture is going with. And I think we see that churches like that everywhere now, where they don't want to be called out on the news. They don't want to have people protesting outside their church. So they basically acquiesce to the culture, and they don't stand for anything. They don't oppose anything. They don't stand for biblical principles. They don't promote the. You had a church there in I think it's in North Carolina where they weren't even going to mention the blood or the cross or anything like that during Easter, which I found to be odd. But anyways, they don't they you know they don't think they need God. They think they have a form of godliness, but it's not. It's just really just religious and ritual, and it's not a true relationship with God. And neither are they moved by the Holy Spirit. I don't know. Anybody can remember that pastor's name in Stephen Furtick, I think, is who it was in that church where they didn't want to mention the blood or mention anything like that during the crucifixion or during Easter or resurrection weekend. Maranatha, Pete, question about Gog and Magog timing with Rapture. You think Rapture will precede Gog? I think it does. Yes, I read a few articles on Jack Kelly's website. He thinks it's close. It's at close of Gog War. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Carol. I think it's Elevation Church. I think you're right. They didn't want to talk about the blood or the cross or the crucifixion during that Easter weekend. Um, but that's an example of churches that are lukewarm. They basically don't take a stand for anything anymore. They just kind of roll with whatever culture, you know, tells them to roll with. As to this other question, I think the reason I think that the United States is not in that picture is because the United States will have be in some form of collapsing at the rapture. So we won't be in any position to help anybody with anything right after the rapture of the church. Now, some people on here might think that the rapture may only take 1% of the population. I tend to think it's going to be somewhere between 10 to 50%, depending on children being taken up to a certain age and the people with Down syndrome, you know, believers of all stripes being caught up and removed out of the equation. But if it's just, I always go with 10%. If it's just 10%, and you're talking about 34 million or whatever being removed instantly from the United States, that will collapse us. I mean, we're on the verge of collapse as it is. I don't even know. We should have collapsed like 10 years ago, but we haven't. So I think we're there. And I don't think it's going to take much for us to have that little nudge that pushes us over the edge to where we are no longer functional as a country. Now, that's not to say that the United States disappears off the map or anything. I'm just saying that we collapse as a country, and whatever comes after, we won't be the United States of America anymore. You know, a constitutional republic will be something else. We'll be part of this new imperial regional system that's being able to get a handle on all the chaos and the lawlessness. Yeah, and Jack Kelly and I disagreed on some certain things, and disagreed with Jack Kinsella, and I disagreed with Chuck Mid I mean, we all disagree on some of these things. A lot of these things that are speculative, things that haven't happened yet, and we're trying to figure out how they're gonna happen. I mean, obviously, there's gonna be points where we all kinda see things a little differently, and that's okay. We agree on the core issues of Christendom, what makes a Christian a Christian. We agree on the core, um, beliefs within, if you wanna narrow that down into, like, premillennial dispensationalism, I think we would agree on almost most of that. But when it comes to things that haven't happened yet that are future, I think there's still a lot out there that we're still trying to make sense of. And, I think if Jack had been alive today, I think he might have changed his mind on this. This might be something that where he might have said, "Yeah, it's starting to look more like this over here." Um, okay. Be Rich, Mrs. Johnson, who did Pete say a video? He said that thinks the rapture is soon. I don't know. Did I say that? If I did, you might have to go back. Let me know which video you're talking about so I can go back and see what I was talking about at the time. I watch a lot of videos. Um, Question: do you still need unspoken prayer? Yeah, I do. I do. Yeah, still kind of. It's better. Things are better now. Um, but things could be better. And one of the prayers that I had prayed for was, obviously for the church I go to, being Church of Christ. They don't study prophecy. They don't want to talk about any of this stuff. And some of the toxic personalities that were in that church have since left, and joined a men's Bible study on Wednesday nights. And interestingly, you've got guys talking about the rapture in there. I thought that was kind of weird. I didn't bring it up. Somebody else brought it up. So I see that there's an interest in it and that people are interested in talking about it. So, I've been protesting this church for a long time by not really participating in anything. And I think the only way that I can effectively to do that now going forward is to be involved and let my voice be heard, and go from there. So things are definitely moving in a good positive direction for that church. My goal is to fully get prophecy taught into that church in every sermon, and as the Holy Spirit leads. But yeah. Okay. Pookie, question: have you seen flyers to vote for Biden at the border for the incoming invaders? If you have, what's your take to combat this? I haven't personally seen it. I know that I've seen congressional briefings that they're talking about how these are being passed in these NGOs in Mexico. I think they're Roman Catholic NGOs that are handing these out to vote for these illegals. But one of the things I had never really considered before is that even if these illegals don't vote, the fact that they're going to be added to the census of whatever counties and states and cities that they end up in is going to add to the electoral votes that are going to be afforded to those places. And so, um, I don't know if that would impact this election or perhaps the next election, if there is one, either. But that's one of those things that most people didn't really think about going into this. But one of the things I will say about at least Latin Americans is, they tend to be pro-family. And I'm not saying everybody coming over is like families. I'm saying that the culture of Latin America is very pro-family because it's largely Catholic, and Catholic is pro-family, anti-abortion, kind of those things, all the things that the left hates. So they're now drawing from these groups that are coming from centuries being steeped in Roman Catholicism. So I don't know that that will necessarily play out to their favor if things were to go on, you know, from here without, um, the rapture or anything. None of those other other things taken into consideration. If life were just to continue going on and on and on, they're bringing in these huge groups of people that come out of Roman Catholicism that's very much pro-family. And look, I'm not like cheerleading for the Roman Catholic Church. I'm just saying that the Roman Catholic Church is pro-family because it benefits the Roman Catholic Church, because the more kids a family has that gets brought into Roman Catholicism, the bigger that's gonna keep building that church. So, I don't think Roman Catholicism is true Christianity. I just think that from a cultural perspective, I think um, they're not doing themselves they're doing themselves a disservice by importing large numbers of these people. They think they're gonna follow along with their progressive ideology. Bulldog merch. Pete, is the kingdom of God the new Jerusalem that comes down in the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth? Is the kingdom of God? No, I think the kingdom of God is going to be where Christ physically rules and reigns from the earth. I think the new Jerusalem comes down at the end of that, but it's not. I think the kingdom is what had been promised to the Jewish people all throughout the Old Testament, and that was a very earthly promise. When you're saying that, like in Isaiah chapter 2, where all the nations will stream to Jerusalem, and they'll come up on the highways from Egypt and from Assyria, and kids playing, with cobras, and the sheep and the lamb laying down with the wolf and the lion, and, like, you know what I mean? Like, this is a very earth-centric promise to the Old Testament, of where Israel is gonna be the head of nations, and there's gonna be peace and tranquility throughout the earth, because Satan is gonna be bound for 1,000 years, and all of those influences are gonna be removed. But that's part of it. I mean, obviously, the church, I would equate the church with the mystery kingdom that we see in Matthew 13. We're the kingdom of God now, but in mystery form, just like the Babylon will be fully manifest into its final um, form inside of the 70th week of Daniel, and it will no longer be that mystery Babylon. It will be like the Babylon, like the real Babylon, like the real Babylonian system that governs the world. Um, but the kingdom will be the physical kingdom here on the earth. But we'll be able to rule and reign with Christ in there, and we're not going to be confined to the earth. But um, I think the New Jerusalem comes down at the end of that. Okay, old softy question: whatever happened to all of Solomon's gold supposedly hidden in Israel? This is a fascinating question, because I do think that these things are going to be found. I don't know when exactly they would play into this, but I think that it is going to be incorporated into um, the coming immediate future. Now, with that said as well, when you think about all of the technologies that over the last 100 years people have invented, that things like zero point energy, anti-gravitational technology, um, vehicles that can run on water or run on nothing. They don't need anything to run on. They can just run. There's technologies like this that have been created and it worked and were patented, and those people disappeared. The people that created them, or they died untimely deaths, and the government's confiscated all of these technologies, going from Tesla, on forward. And I can't help but think that at some point, when the Antichrist comes to power, all of these things are going to be brought back out, and they're going to be used as ways to solve all these insurmountable problems that we have. And then on top of that, you have all of this hidden wealth and gold and whatnot that have been hidden for ages and ages are going to also be available to him. Because when the Antichrist comes, he's not going to just be a man ruling. I mean, he is going to be a man ruling, but he's also going to have all the backing and power of hell behind him. And so, although it's a mystery to us where that gold is from Solomon's mines, it's not a mystery to the demons. It's not a mystery to the demonic realm or to the fallen angels. They know exactly where those things are. And when the time is right, they're going to open this up to this Antichrist guy, and he's going to have all of these things accessible to him. So, not just Solomon's gold, but everything. I mean, every ship that's ever sunk, a Spanish galleon that has tons and tons of gold in it and precious diamonds and all sorts of things that we don't know where it is now. The demons know where they are, and they'll be able to direct the Antichrist forces to start collecting these things up from around the world. And he is going to have more wealth than any ruler ever had, and it may include Solomon's gold, um, and as well as all of these technologies that have been hidden from mankind. When a guy comes out in the 1970s and can make a car that can run on uh, on water, just regular tap water, you've got to believe that the oil and gas companies out there are not going to let this guy live, nor let his technology go mainstream. They're going to take him out, and they're going to take everything. That's what's happened. It's happened over and over and over. Um, so yeah, Isaiah 26:3, with trillions at his disposal. Uh, yeah, it's a mystery to us where these things are. It is not a mystery to the demonic realm, to the fallen angels. They know exactly where this stuff is, and they will be directing this man to find it all, and he's going to have more wealth than anybody can shake a stick at. Gene and Mike Buford, question: how will Christians serve Jesus Christ on planet Earth? We as Christians. So I'm blanking on the passage right now off the top of my head, but we're not only sons, but if we're sons, then we're heirs to co-reign with Christ in this kingdom age. I imagine that we will serve as some type of viceroys or governors or whatever of regions of territories, because you got to think when okay, after the second coming, you have the 75 days that are additional. I think there's a lot of terraforming that's going to happen during this time, and the world is going to be renewed back to its, um, I don't know if it's going to say pre-flood or maybe Garden of Eden type of state where there's not going to be any uninhabitable land on the earth anymore. Like every square inch of land, you'll be able to live and it will not only live, but like thrive on. Like it'll be fertile ground. The Sahara deserts will be fertile farmlands and forests, and the Antarctic will be fertile and forested and beautiful, and those that survive the tribulation and survive the sheep and goat judgment and go forward into the kingdom age are now, and not only that, they're given, you know, this longevity put back on them so that they can live for the full 1,000 years if they're worshiping God. And they will have who knows how many children each. And then this will be like, I think we're at 8 billion people right now. I mean, you're talking about there's probably going to be upwards of 25 to 35 billion people at the end of the kingdom age, maybe more, maybe like 40 billion, maybe some number we don't even know yet. But and there'll still be plenty of room for everybody. And we'll be ruling and reigning with Christ as the world begins to repopulate and expand back out to the way it was intended to do after Noah, and well, after Adam and Eve too, but particularly after Noah, when God tells them to be fruitful and repopulate the earth and to spread out and fill the earth. So we'll be like the I don't know what I don't want to call it superheroes, but we'll be like we'll have that kind of physicality. We're indestructible, immortal, but we're ruling in our small section. And when the time of the year comes, we send our tributes to the king, and we're just helping oversee all that. Um, I mean, I probably will be a janitor in somebody's small business or something. I don't know exactly what I'll be doing, but, we'll be there serving. Um, Koa Nguyen question: Pete, could you please explain more about how the US would collapse after the rapture? You usually take an example of 10% Americans raptured and the US collapsed. Okay. Um, so let's say that 10% is 34 million Americans. Well, let me do it this way. Let's say that 10% is the adults. Not I think if we're going to add in all the kids and children and babies and all that, I think we're probably looking at 40-50%. But let's just say 10% of that is just the adults. These are just working class adults that show up to work, pay their bills, pay their mortgage, they buy groceries, they go on vacations, they spend money at places, that traditional sense, what you normally would do. If that all suddenly comes to an end and people are no longer paying their mortgage, they're no longer paying into the system, and not only that, let's say that out of this group, you've got people from all sorts of walks of life, all different professions. Now they're not showing up to their jobs to do their jobs. We're going to see a systematic collapsing of this. We have a very fragile system right now. Um, whether you want to call it supply chain system or that plus just the way our country functions. But imagine, I imagine that the full impact financially really wouldn't be felt for at least the first 2 weeks, up into the first month, where uh, millions and millions and millions of people are no longer paying their mortgage at the end of the month. I guess that depends on when the rapture is. So if the rapture happened the day before the end of the month, and then people aren't there to pay the mortgage the next day, you would start seeing collapsing in various systems, sections, and sectors of the economy. And then you add on top of that everybody that's like doctors and lawyers and police officers, and these people are no longer there to show up to their job at the same exact time when there's going to be the biggest demand on emergency services in ever. That is also a form of collapsing. On top of that, you're going to have just the slightest whiff of opportunity would send the lawless hordes into a tizzy and begin rioting and begin doing all these things. Once they realize what's happened, there'll be, uh, man, you talk about the pillaging and looting and all that stuff that would happen after this. All of these things are going to compound upon each other, and the United States won't be able to survive that. We're not a homogenous society anymore. We're a very diverse society. Um, so there's no sense of, and there's also, we're probably at the lowest point as a nation where we identify or patriotic or want to kind of protect things. Now it's kind of like everybody's for themselves. So I don't think it would take much for us to collapse. Now, if you saw that movie Civil War, I think that movie was sugarcoating a lot of things. I think it would there's not going to be any real safe places to go to. It'll take whatever government arises out of the ashes of the United States to start securing certain places and then allowing people to come in and find shelter there. They might take over old military bases or some places that are easy to secure and start building from there. But you're talking about the restrainer being removed, people's acting on um, their most base intuitions. They're going to be doing whatever they want. They're going to see opportunity. Like if I'm here and I know the rapture happened and I didn't go up in the rapture, let's say I didn't believe in God or anything, and I know my neighbor's a Christian, I'll be going over to his place and stealing everything out of their house, you know? I mean, like, that's just gonna be that times 100,000,000, you know, just multiply that to the biggest amount you could. And obviously, the cities would be the last place you'd wanna be. Then you have the criminal elements, whether you're talking about organized cartels in northern Mexico moving up. You've got biker gangs out the wazoo that will be taking over a lot of the central parts of the United States. You'll have, other gangs and criminal networks taking advantage of the chaos. I mean, it's gonna be there's not it's gonna be a collapse. I don't really know how else to say it, but the bigger they are, the harder they fall, right? Okay, good question. Thank you. And again, Koa, however, I see the U.S. is still strong and have influence significantly. My thoughts is it must take 40, 50% of to be raptured Americans to make it collapse. Yeah, again, I use 10% as kind of the low end, but if we add in kids and babies and all those people, i- if you're a couple and you have two or three kids and you're not saved and your kids are taken, I mean, that's devastating. I mean, you're not only you're talking about the physical collapsing of the United States, but you're talking about the psychological collapsing of the United States, of the American people collapsing at that point, that there is no recovering from this. Everything has changed. It'll change everything forever. And so um it could be as high as 50%. I don't and I'm that's including children and kids under the age of accountability. But I think in terms of adults, it could be anywhere from like, I don't know, 10 to 20%, but it's going to be enough that the United States will not be able to recover. And just think about where you live now and think about, let's just say the waste management folks decide to go on strike, and so nobody's out collecting garbage anymore. Just think about how quickly that will add up and cause chaos. That's just one small section of our society. Now multiply that around the world, and you've got supply chain systems collapsing. You've got militaries that can't even fill formations anymore because half the formation's gone or a percentage of the formation's gone. Key people that do key jobs are now no longer there. The knowledge they had, they've taken with them. I mean, so there's any number of ways that this is going to have ramifications. I know, like when you watch Left Behind or read the books, it's always just like planes collapsing, but really that's few and far between that will happen. More likely, you're going to have a ton of car accidents everywhere, and those will clog up all the highways and roads, which will put a huge demand on the emergency services, which are already going to be reduced workforce. And then they're not able to go and respond to everything. It's just going to escalate very quickly. I don't think it's going to take much. Okay. Isaiah 26:3 question. You mentioned not having enough bandwidth that is that because more isn't available in your area or because of cost? Well, originally when I started out, I had I think it was like 50 megabytes per second upload. And then I found out that the cost over the 2 years or so that was under that system, they basically for the same cost, I could double that. So I went up to the next highest one, which was 100. And I've been kind of holding out because they've been threatening to put in fiber optic in the area for the longest time, and they keep saying they're going to do it, and they never do. So I don't know. I may have to go up to the next level, but regardless, I can only get the strength that I get from the nearest tower, cell tower, whatever, and then even that, you've got more and more people moving into the area, so it just keeps putting a demand on the system because everybody's leaving California, they're leaving New York, they're leaving all these blue states, and they're moving here to my neighborhood, and it's just putting a huge demand on the bandwidth. Plus, I have 5 kids, and they all watching TV and stuff, and it's just it is what it is. Okay. Question is Second Thessalonians 2:3 talking about the rapture or the second coming? Well, let's read that. I think it's the rapture and the second coming. Says, now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is the rapture, and or the coming, I guess, is the second coming, and our gathering together to him, we ask you, do not be soon shaken in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as though the day of Christ had come. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, and the son of perdition. So that falling away question, I guess you're asking about the falling away, that word apostasia. And I've been of the mind for many years now that it means both the rapture and because they happen simultaneously, but they one also happens to cause the other to happen. So Andy Woods is kind of the champion for that position of the apostasia being the rapture. And you got guys like Lee Brainerd, who's a champion for it just meaning the departure, the whole scale departure from the faith. And I believe that the actual rapture will be the dividing point which separates true Christians from those pretending to be Christians. So what remains after the rapture is going to be this largely, it's just going to be this apostate Christianity. So I've always seen it as both. I think Paul, by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, chose that word specifically because it can mean both. And he could have used other words, I'm assuming, to delineate what he was talking about more specifically. But I think, honestly, because one causes the other and they kind of happen in conjunction with each other, that it means both. And I suppose that I'm kind of splitting the baby on that particular nuance, but I've just always held to that position. Okay. Mindy, let's see. Janice, do you think after the rapture we can see and be able to look down on Earth? Yes, I think we will. We'll be watching it from the bleachers up there, but like I think we're going to be seeing what's happening on the Earth. Now, I think that's in, we'll probably the first thing that we do after the rapture is the Bema judgment. But again, we're stepping out of time into eternity, into timelessness, and they'll conduct the Bema judgment. So I don't know. I'm assuming that that could all take place within like a second of time here on the earth. And we're talking about Christians for the last 2,000 years. So, I don't necessarily know how that plays out, but I think that we'll go through the Bema judgment first, and then we'll see the events unfolding on the earth. Sandra Schaefer, question: do you think we will be aware of who is left behind at the moment of the rapture? I think we will, yeah. Um, I know a lot of people have talked about, we'll be surprised at who we see in heaven. Some people will be surprised to see me there. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know you'd be here." Um, but I also think we'll also kind of know. And I think back to Terry James when he had his heart attack. I think first or second one, and he's seeing heaven. This he's having this experience, and he sees this young, gorgeous woman coming toward him, and he knew her instinctively, and she knew him instinctively, and it was his Sunday school teacher from when he was a little kid. And he'd only never known her as an old woman. She'd only ever been this like 67-year-old woman when he knew her as a kid. And now he's seeing her young and vibrant, but he knew who she was in that nanosecond. He knew she was. So I think we're going to have that level of understanding there. That we're going to have that upgrade, obviously, that full body upgrade, full mind, spirit, etc. upgrade. And I think we're just going to know. I don't know if we'll know the fate of them, what happens to them after the rapture, but I think we'll know it right at that moment who's there and who's not there. Betty, uh, please share thoughts regarding multiple raptures and view that first rapture only for those watching wholeheartedly. I only believe that there's one rapture. Well, technically two. So we'll have our rapture, the church, And that's anybody that's ever been born again, truly born again, believer, sealed by the Holy Spirit, will be caught up. And then I also think in God's mercy, He catches those kids up that are under this certain age of accountability, not because they deserve it, but because He's merciful like that, and because they may not, if they're not going to live, be old enough to even survive if they're going to, if they were to die at the end of the tribulation and they're still under that age, which I think is going to be the age of 20, then I think He just pulls them up early. Now, the only other people that we see raptured after that are the two witnesses in Revelation 11. So they are caught up in front of everybody. And this is after the bodies were laying on the streets for 3.5 years. And then I don't believe that there's multiple raptures throughout based on our watching or not watching. I think that that's going to, I think our attentiveness in this and looking for the Lord to return and all that is going to be brought forth in the Bema judgment. Gloria, sometimes I wonder just how much things will be ready and how much more we may see. I kind of think we are going to see a lot of awful things before the rapture. Thoughts? Yeah, I mean, I look at what we've seen since, for me, since 2007. You know, I mentioned a lot of times that even though I believe, I think it was 2009 period, I came to kind of believe that the rapture was going to be in the mid 20s. Um, Still, I didn't know if there was gonna be a gap in time and then how long that gap would be, whether it be 10 years or 5 years, or I thought it would be a considerable amount of time, but the further that we've pressed into this, the shorter I think that gap needs to be because there's less things that have to happen. So, it's I didn't think we'd see COVID, I didn't think we'd see some of the things that we're seeing now, but do I think that we'll see things worse than this? Sure. I mean, it's possible. Now, I think one of the, hey, Tom. I think one of the things that I think Lee and I had been asked this question in Colorado, and he makes a good point that Satan knows that when he persecutes the church in the West, or the church anywhere rather, that there is that the church spreads like a wildfire, like revival starts breaking out. I mean, it really is it causes revival, and he knows that he doesn't want that. And he has the church right now right where he wants them in the West, in particular, because we're fat, dumb, and happy, just worrying about what's coming on the weekend so we can go take our boat to the lake, and we're more concerned about who's playing the football on Sunday than we are uh, with whether our friends are saved or not. Like that is the state of the church in America today. And so he has us right where he wants us. What I do think will happen is we're going to start seeing a division, the tightening of the screws, if you will, on true biblical Christianity versus people that are lukewarm, that just will go with whatever society tells them. And so I think there's going to be like I say, a tightening of the screws against true Christian channels and groups and peoples and teachers and so forth, to silence them without it rising to the level of persecution. And in a way, in a spiritual way, it's kind of like it's like a Cold War. So in the Cold War, we had the United States and the Soviet Union, both nuclear powers, who early on learned that it was not worth, we just destroy the world and nobody would live on it if we were to go to war with each other. So instead, we began to go through proxies and we began to fight each other through other nations, and then through subterfuge and espionage and what they call gray war tactics. So gray war is warfare that never rises to the level of a actual declared war, kind of like what we're seeing with Hezbollah today, where Hezbollah will launch. 20 missiles or something at Israel, but then stop. And then Israel responds. And so it's kind of this tit for tat kind of thing that happens, but it's not a full on war. And I think that's where Satan has us right now. And he's going to raise persecution up very subtly, very slowly. And he's going to really just target true biblical Christians, because ultimately what he wants us to do is he wants us to abandon our faith and to bend the knee to culture, so that we become basically of no effect. But he doesn't want to turn it up too hard, because then he is going to create a bunch of Pauls. He's going to create a bunch of guys out there and women out there on fire for the Lord, and that's the last thing he wants. So he's kind of got us squarely where he wants us, but he's going to keep turning the screws up on true Christians to get us to. And it's like this Christian baker in Colorado who wins a court case, and then another a lawsuit comes against him from some other angle, and it's just whittling and wearing him down, wearing him down, wearing him down, wearing him down. And we see that everywhere. That's kind of like what we've kind of we're at this point now where we can't see any kind of good coming out of anything, because as soon as something good comes out of it, a bunch of negative comes out with it. We throw our hands up in the air in a hallelujah because Johnson takes the speakership of the House, and then he passes this legislation that has all this extra junk in it. But as I mentioned before, he's looking at it from a biblical perspective, thinking, okay, well, at least I'm getting this support that we need for Israel. I don't really care about the rest of this stuff, because if we bless Israel, we'll be blessed by this. So regardless, we're going to be on the okay end of this. Uh, so I don't know. I think that's Satan's tactic right now, is to kind of tighten the screws on true biblical born again believers, but allowing the rest of Laodicean Christianity to just go unchallenged and keep doing what they're doing. Yeah, trying to make us backslide. Exactly. Again, Bulldog Garage merch. Question, Pete. Do you think lost people, small kids, will be left behind with them to repopulate the earth in the 100,000 year or the 1,000 year reign? Uh, do you think lost people with small kids will be left behind with them to repopulate the earth? Yeah, I think honestly, I think whether it's at the rapture or at the second coming, if you're a child, there's a certain extent of mercy that God extends to you, because you're incapable of making decisions pertinent to your your salvation. And the reason that I know that some people don't see the age of accountability as 20. I'm simply going off what the Bible used in the in the days of the Exodus, in the days before they entered into the promised land, was the age of 20. So the 20 was a cutoff age. I mean, over the age of 20, you're an adult. Under the age, you're not accountable, regardless of whether you were a good kid or a bad kid or whatever. It doesn't specify any of that. It uses that age as a benchmark, and or the dividing line between the two. And we know now, thousands of years later, through modern medicine and whatnot, that the human brain develops. So that's right around the time that the human brain fully develops, is around the age of 20. And that is where, uh, because our eternal security lies in our ability to make a decision for Christ or not for Christ. And that comes from your prefrontal cortex, which is developed through your education, your experiences, the things that you're exposed to in life. You begin to formulate worldviews uh, through that. And so even at the age of 16, I would look at a kid like myself and think, yeah, I knew right from wrong, but I didn't understand consequences, and I surely didn't understand eternal consequences. That's why we have so many young people doing so many stupid things that they would never do as an adult. Because, I mean, think about your own lives. Think about things you did as a teenager that you would never do now as an adult, because you know better. And somehow you survived. By the grace of God, you survived, and by the grace of God, I survived. But um, it's just I think we lack the ability to understand consequences. That's why our judicial system now is set up to where if you're under the age of 18, you're charged as a minor, and if you're over the age of 18, you're charged as an adult for most cases, right? Now, people will always bring out the examples of like the Columbine kids or like other kids that do heinous, terrible things. Again, uh, at least from God's perspective, sin is sin. I mean, any sin is going to separate you from Him forever. And since we're born into sin and we're born into sin and we have a sin nature, and we're also at that point in our life where we don't understand why or what that means or how that impacts things down the road. We don't have that ability to formulate. We can't think that far ahead because we've not lived long enough to understand those things. So I think all children under the age will be caught up um, at the rapture, which then bumps that whole percentage number up to like 50%, at least of a nation's population. And then for the second coming, presume so if that's true, right? If that part is true, then the oldest a child could be, if a child is conceived immediately after the rapture, which I don't think would happen, but let's just say somewhere in there, the child is conceived. The oldest they could be at the end of the the 7-year tribulation is going to be 7 or 8, still well under the age of accountability. So yes, I think they would enter into the kingdom age in their physical forms. So TJ Harley, Lee Brainerd claims in heaven we eat steak. Your thoughts? This is crazy. Will God not bring us back to the Garden of Eden state? Not a I absolutely agree with Lee. I think we'll be able to eat steaks and whatever. Now, I see your point there, TJ. Um, you're thinking that I have to kill an animal in order to enjoy a steak. I kill a cow. But here's God that spoke the universe into existence just by his sheer will. I mean, when you think about from the smallest level of reality that we can come to or understand, the quantum realm, to the most vast expanse of the universe and the trillions of galaxies that are spinning around and all the stars and planets and everything that's in there. And then Jesus knows all of them by name, and he keeps all of them spinning and doing what they're doing by his sheer will. I think he can create a steak that he can create it out of nothing, and it's just a steak. Nothing had to die for it. It is. Or a bacon and egg taco or whatever. I don't think he has to kill anything in order for us to enjoy that kind of food if we want it. So, steak tree. Oh, Pookie, yes, absolutely. No crickets either. Yep. Uh, oh man, there's a lot of good questions today. Thank you, Sarah, for sorry, my phone's ringing. Thank you for collecting all the questions, Sarah, and for the mods on here. I always appreciate you guys. Um, give me one second here. Okay. Okay. It's good. It's a lot of good questions. And honestly, guys, thank you for putting up with my technological tomfoolery today with all the audio issues I had. Um, I don't know. I really like doing Rumble. I like doing the Rumble chat, the Rumble blah, 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 broadcast. But I can't. It is such a tedious process to to get online on Rumble. I end up making like 2 or 3 video promos, and like the last one will be the actual, like, that's where I go live. It's I just don't do it enough to get proficient in it. And then I was really wanting to I spent Friday, I probably spent like 2 hours going through downloading another OBS and trying to get so that I can stream from my website. And there's a way to do it. I just I just was at wit's end at the time of trying to finish it. I just gave up on it, and I ended up just streaming through Rumble. But um, somebody had asked before about the link that I had for my previous article or previous video for the that giant anomaly off the coast of Africa, and YouTube gave me a strike for that, even though it's like from MSN.com, and it was just a news story. So I challenged it. I guess it's fixed or whatever, but um, you never know how long I'll be on YouTube. I mean, who knows? If I am kicked off YouTube for whatever, then I'll just be on Rumble, and all you guys will have to join on Rumble if you want to watch me there. But until then, I was hoping to have a way to stream from my platform just in case I couldn't do anything else. But it is a I'm gonna have to get some help on that one from the folks at Wix to help me do that. But oh crap! Hey guys, I gotta go. I just realized it's 3:12, and I gotta go get my kids. So thank you. The last time I looked at my clock, it was like two something, and I was thinking I got time. But thank you guys. Appreciate you. Yeah, keep praying for me. I did ask on Rumble. I don't know how many people saw it, but if you've ever supported me financially or sent anything in, check, whatever, I would like to thank you and thank you in a way like put a supporters page on my website and just do like your first name and your last initial. I know some people are don't want any kind of recognition. That's fine. If you do want it, I'll have to figure out a way that you can let me know because I don't have the ability to write everybody back and thank everybody personally. I tried to do that back in when I was in Kentucky and I just got overwhelmed. There just wasn't a way for me to do it. So um, if I can put a page up that has your name on there, like a wall, honor wall or something that says thank you from me to you, and let me know if that's something you guys are okay with. If not, then we'll just kind of keep doing what we're doing. But thank you all. Thanks for sticking with me through all this issues. And yeah, I got to go get my kids now. So today's going to be a busy day. Uh, feel free to write me an email. I try to get back to everybody. Sometimes it's a little late, like a week or two late, but I try to get your emails and respond back to you. If you send me like a story and you want a story kind of response, that may take a little bit longer. But if it's a simple question, simple this, that, or whether, please shoot me an email. I'm just, again, I'm a one man band here. So aside from Randy and some other folks that contribute in the writing and the mods here, I pretty much do everything else by myself. And the bulk of my time is spent dealing with all of the technology junk and all of the platforms and all that stuff. So it's yeah, no, my daughter's texting me like, "Hey, where are you?" All right, I've got to go. Thank you guys. God bless, and hope you have a great rest of the week. Hey, Tyler's on tonight, I think, or no, tomorrow night, Tuesday night. I will be on with Amy Moosfelt, if I'm saying her name right. I will be on her channel Friday during the day, and I'll have a link for that. We'll send that out, and then tomorrow night, earlier in the night, Tuesday night, it will be 6, I think, my time. I'll be on with JB Hickson on his Zoom thing. That if you're on a member of his channel, a member of his group, he does a Zoom thing where we interact on Zoom, and I'm looking at you, you're looking at me, that kind of thing. So I'll be on with JB Hickson tomorrow night. So and then I'll be on with Kurt Reed on May 1st, I think is the next one. So God bless you guys. Take care. Know I'm praying for you and thinking about you guys, and just keep me in your prayers as well. So keep lifting each other up until that day, till that trumpet blast. So God bless, take care, and we'll see you soon.